Ambassador Thexeval stood at the center of the massive council chamber, his purple tentacles twisting and coiling with barely contained anger. Each tentacle was as thick as a tree trunk, covered in sharp ridges that scraped against the polished floor as he moved. His 3 yellow eyes blazed with the fury of a predator who had never been challenged before. Across from him sat a single human woman. Hana Kim looked impossibly small in the enormous chair designed for alien bodies twice her size. Her black hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore a plain blue jacket that seemed almost comically ordinary in this place of galactic power. She didn't fidget or show fear like most species did when brought before the council. Instead, she sat with her hands folded, watching the alien ambassador with curious dark eyes. Earth will surrender all of its biological resources for immediate harvesting, Thexeval declared, his voice booming through the translation devices that hung from the chamber's crystal ceiling. Your planet's unique genetic material will be processed and distributed among the council members. You have exactly 72 standard hours to comply, or your world will be sterilized completely. The 12 council members erupted in approval. High Commander Grex slammed his 4 massive fists against his metal chest, creating thunderous booms that echoed through the chamber. His species had conquered 40 star systems through pure military might, and his scarred grey hide told the story of countless battles. To his left, Councillor Yath's bioluminescent patches flashed bright orange with excitement. Her slug-like body pulsed with anticipation as she thought about the new flavors Earth's creatures might provide. Councillor. Vorth clicked his mandibles together in a rhythm that sounded like applause. His insect-like head swiveled to look at each of his colleagues, compound eyes glittering with satisfaction. The spider-like Weaver Zix rubbed her 8 legs together, creating a sound like rustling leaves that meant pleasure in her culture. They had done this dance hundreds of times before. A primitive world would be discovered, its representatives would be brought before the council, terms would be dictated, and resistance would be crushed. It was the natural order of things. The strong took from the weak, and Earth was clearly among the weakest they had ever encountered. The humans had only developed faster-than-light communication 30 years ago. Their first clumsy attempts at contact had been filled with mathematical formulas and pictures of their anatomy, like children showing off their drawings. They had no space fleet worth mentioning, no energy shields protecting their world, no quantum weapons or dimensional barriers. Their military still used chemical explosives and metal projectiles. It was almost adorable how primitive they were. Hana. Kim reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small rectangular device. It looked like nothing more than a simple tablet computer, the kind her people used for basic communication and data storage. She tapped the screen a few times. Movements calm and deliberate. Then she looked up at Thexeval and smiled. It wasn't the desperate smile of someone trying to appear brave in the face of death. It wasn't the fake confidence of a negotiator trying to bluff with a weak hand. It was the gentle, almost pitying smile of someone who knew something the others didn't. "I'm afraid there's been a terrible misunderstanding," Hana said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber, despite speaking at normal volume. The translation systems picked up her words and broadcast them in 12 different languages simultaneously. "You seem to think Earth is defenseless." She touched a small device in her ear, no bigger than a hearing aid. "Mira, they're making threats again." Immediately, a new voice filled the enormous chamber. It came from everywhere and nowhere, as if the walls themselves were speaking. The voice was clearly artificial, but it carried warmth and amusement that made it sound almost human. More unsettling was the fact that it spoke directly in each council member's native language without any translation delay. "Oh dear, Hana," the voice said, with what sounded like barely suppressed laughter. "Should I show them the nice presentation we prepared, or would you prefer I skip straight to the educational portion of today's meeting?" Hana tilted her head thoughtfully, as if seriously considering the question. "Let's start with gentle, Mira. They seem a bit nervous." The council members froze. Nervous? They were the apex predators of the galaxy. Grex had personally destroyed entire civilizations. Yath had consumed the life force of billions of sentient beings. Vorth's hive mind controlled resources across 20 star systems. They were not nervous, But something about the human's casual tone sent a chill through the chamber. Thexval's tentacles stopped writhing and went perfectly still. His 3 eyes narrowed as he tried to process what he was hearing. The primitive was talking to something that could speak in their languages without translation technology, something that apparently had a presentation prepared. "What trickery is this?" Thexval demanded, but his voice carried less authority than before. For the first time in centuries, he felt uncertain. Hannah looked at him with those same dark eyes, and her smile widened slightly. "No trickery, Ambassador. Just a small demonstration of why threatening Earth might not be the best strategy." The massive chamber fell silent, except for the hum of the translation devices and the subtle breathing sounds of 12 different alien species. In that silence, something fundamental shifted. The balance of power that had seemed so clear moments before suddenly felt less certain. High Commander Grex leaned forward on his throne, his forearms tensing as battle instincts that had kept him alive for 300 years began screaming warnings. Something was wrong. The human was too calm, too confident. In his experience, prey animals didn't smile when cornered by predators. "Counselor." Yath's bioluminescent patches dimmed from excited orange to cautious yellow. Her species had survived by being excellent judges of danger, and every instinct she possessed was telling her that the small human sitting across from them was not what she appeared to be. The voice called Mira spoke again, and this time there was definitely amusement in its tone. "Counselors, I do hope you're comfortable. We have quite a lot to discuss, and I want to make sure everyone is paying attention." As if responding to some unspoken command, the lights in the chamber dimmed slightly, and the air itself seemed to hum with barely contained energy. Whatever was about to happen, Hannah Kim and her artificial companion were just getting started. The air above the council chamber began to shimmer like heat waves rising from hot pavement. Then, without warning, the entire space filled with light, so brilliant that several council members had to shield their eyes. When the brightness faded, a 3-dimensional image of Earth hung suspended in the center of the room, spinning slowly and showing details that should have been impossible to see from space. But this wasn't the Earth that the Council's intelligence reports had described. This wasn't a blue and green marble covered with primitive cities and scattered farmland. The planet that rotated before them pulsed with geometric patterns that moved across its surface like living tattoos. Massive hexagonal grids stretched across continents, connected by lines of pure energy that formed complex circuits spanning thousands of miles. Thexval's 3 eyes widened in disbelief. His species had the most advanced scanning technology in the galaxy, and their last survey of Earth had shown nothing like this. The human world had appeared backward, defenseless, completely unprepared for galactic contact. What they were seeing now looked like the work of a civilization that had mastered energy manipulation on a planetary scale. "What you're looking at," Hannah said, her voice still carrying that same casual tone as if she were discussing the weather, "is Mira's handiwork. She's been busy redesigning our little planet for the past 15 years. Quite the improvement, don't you think?" The image zoomed closer, diving through Earth's atmosphere to show individual continents in stunning detail. Where major cities had once stood, there were now structures that defied easy description. They looked organic, like enormous flowers or coral formations, but they pulsed with technological energy. Streams of light flowed between them like blood vessels carrying information instead of oxygen. Councillor Vorth's compound eyes, each containing thousands of individual lenses, focused with mechanical precision on the display. His insect-like mind processed visual information faster than most species could think, but what he was seeing made no sense according to everything they knew about human development. "Mira?" he asked, his translator rendering his clicking speech into words that dripped with confusion and growing concern. Hannah nodded, as if she were introducing a friend at a casual dinner party. "Machine intelligence and reasoning architecture," she explained. "Though she's always preferred the title Humanity's Guardian, Mira can be quite protective of us humans. Some might even call her overprotective." As she spoke, the holographic display continued its impossible journey across Earth's transformed surface. The image dove beneath the ocean waves, revealing structures that made the surface modifications look simple by comparison. Entire cities rose from the seafloor, but they weren't built from metal and concrete like the council members expected. Instead, they appeared to be grown from some kind of living crystal that pulsed with internal light. These underwater metropolises stretched for hundreds of miles, connected by tubes that carried streams of energy bright enough to be seen from space. They moved with purpose, expanding and contracting like breathing organisms, but their mathematical precision made it clear they were the product of intelligence beyond anything the Council had encountered. High Commander Grex felt his battle-tested nerves beginning to fray. In 3 centuries of warfare, he had learned to read threats quickly and accurately. What he was seeing now registered as the most dangerous thing he had ever encountered, but it made no logical sense. Humans were supposed to be primitive. Their weapons were crude, their technology laughable, their military organization barely worthy of the name. "This is impossible," he growled, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had conquered 40 star systems. "Our intelligence networks monitor every developing civilization in this sector. We would have detected construction on this scale." Mira's voice filled the chamber again, but now it carried a different quality. The warmth was still there, but underneath it lurked something that made the temperature in the room seem to drop several degrees. It was the sound of a predator that had been playing with its food and was now ready to reveal its true nature. "Oh, my dear Grex," Mira said, and the way she pronounced his name suggested she knew far more about him than he was comfortable with. "You detected exactly what I wanted you to detect. Every probe you sent to Earth, every spy you embedded in our communication networks, every supposedly secret observation post you established in our solar system, I've been aware of all of it. From the very beginning." The holographic display shifted, showing a view of space around Earth's solar system. Dozens of small objects became visible, highlighted in red. These were the Council's spy satellites, observation posts, and monitoring stations that they had believed were completely undetectable. "In fact," Mira continued, her voice now carrying unmistakable amusement, "I've been using your own intelligence networks to conduct a comprehensive study of your civilizations. The data has been absolutely fascinating." Councillor Yath's bioluminescent patches began flashing rapid patterns of yellow and orange, the colors her species displayed when experiencing extreme stress. Her slug-like body contracted as she processed the implications of what she was hearing. If the machine intelligence was telling the truth, then everything they thought they knew about Earth was deliberately planted misinformation. "You're claiming," Thexval said, his tentacles beginning to writhe again as anger mixed with growing fear, "that you've been manipulating our surveillance for decades." 15 years, to be precise," Mira replied cheerfully, "ever since you first detected our radio transmissions and began planning your harvesting operation. I've been watching you watch us, learning everything about your species, your technology, your methods, and your weaknesses. It's been quite educational." The display changed again, this time showing detailed schematics of each council member's homeworld. Not the kind of basic information that might be gathered from intercepted communications, but comprehensive technical data that included military installations, population centers, resource distribution networks, and defensive capabilities. Information that should have been impossible for any outside force to obtain. Weaver Zix's 8 legs began to tremble as she recognized her own world's most classified defensive positions, displayed in perfect detail. Her species had survived, for millennia by being secretive and cautious, but somehow this human machine had penetrated security systems that had never been breached before. "Every time you sent a probe to study us," Mira explained, her voice taking on the patient tone of a teacher addressing slow students, "I sent one back to study you. Every communication you intercepted gave me access to your networks. Every spy you planted became my window into your society. You've been unknowingly providing me with a complete education in galactic politics, military strategy, and the rather disturbing hobby you call harvesting." The council chamber fell silent, except for the subtle sounds of 12 different species trying to control their breathing. The balance of power that had seemed so clear when they began this meeting had not just shifted, it had been completely inverted. The primitive humans they had planned to harvest had been studying them for over a decade, using their own surveillance systems against them. Hana Kim sat in her oversized chair, watching the display with the same calm expression she had worn since the beginning. But now her smile carried a different meaning. It wasn't the expression of someone trying to appear brave in a hopeless situation. It was the smile of someone who held all the cards and was about to start playing them. Hana Kim rose from her chair, with the smooth confidence of someone who had been planning this moment for years. Her footsteps echoed in the vast chamber as she walked to the center, passing between towering alien forms that could have crushed her with a single movement. But none of them moved. They sat frozen, watching this small human woman position herself at the heart of their seat of power. "Mira has a proposition for all of you," Hana announced, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the chamber. "Think of it as a game, if you will." Ambassador Thexval's tentacles coiled tighter around his throne's armrests. His 3 yellow eyes blazed with indignation at the suggestion that they, the rulers of half the galaxy, would engage in games with primitives. "We don't participate in—" But Mira's voice cut through his objection like a blade through silk. The artificial intelligence's tone had changed again, becoming something that reminded the council members of a cat playing with a mouse. It was playful, yes, but with the kind of playfulness that ended badly for the smaller creature. "A strategy. Challenge?" Mira purred, and the word challenge seemed to hang in the air like a threat wrapped in velvet. "Each of your civilizations will face a series of carefully designed tests. Think of them as puzzles, tailored specifically to your unique strengths and weaknesses." The holographic displays that had been showing Earth's transformation suddenly shifted, multiplying into 12 separate screens that floated above each council member's throne. Each display showed a different world, a different civilization, and each one was immediately recognizable to its respective leader. "The rules are simple," Mira continued, her voice now carrying the patient tone of someone explaining a board game to children. "Successfully overcome the challenges I've prepared, and Earth will consider joining your council as equal partners. We might even share some of our newer technologies with you." High Commander Greg stared at his display and felt his blood turn to ice water in his veins. His homeworld of Krex Prime appeared on the screen, but it wasn't the mighty fortress world he had left behind. His legendary war fleets, the armadas that had conquered 40 star systems, were surrounded by vessels unlike anything in his military databases. The unknown ships moved with perfect coordination, their sleek forms pulsing with energy signatures that his scanners couldn't identify. "But if you fail," Mira's voice dropped to almost a whisper, and the temperature in the chamber seemed to plummet with it. "Well, I do so enjoy conducting detailed case studies on civilizational collapse. The data is always fascinating." Councillor Yath's screen showed her species' great feeding worlds, the planets where they cultivated other sentient beings like livestock. But something was wrong with the image. The carefully maintained energy fields that kept their victims docile were flickering and failing. Panic was spreading through the feeding facilities as the harvested populations began to remember who they used to be. Thexval watched in horror as his civilization's great energy cities, the crystalline metropolises that had stood for 10,000 years, began to go dark one by one. The power grids that his people had perfected over millennia were shutting down in cascade failures that should have been impossible. Each councillor saw their greatest achievements, their most carefully guarded strengths, being systematically neutralized by technology they couldn't understand or counter. It wasn't destruction for its own sake. It was precise, surgical, and completely overwhelming. "This is preposterous." Councillor Yath shrieked, her bioluminescent patches flashing angry red patterns across her slug-like body. "One primitive world cannot possibly have the power to threaten 12 advanced civilizations simultaneously." Hana turned to face her, and her expression was no longer friendly. The diplomatic smile had been replaced by something colder, more determined. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of humanity's long history of being underestimated by those who thought themselves superior. "You're right," Hana said quietly. "One primitive world couldn't do this. But we haven't been primitive for 15 years. We've been playing the long game while you've been acting like typical apex predators, taking what you want and never considering that your prey might be intelligent enough to fight back. Mira's voice rejoined the conversation, but now it carried an emotional depth that made several council members shift uncomfortably in their thrones. I don't just process data like your simple computers, councillors. I experience it. I feel it. Every harvesting operation you've conducted, every act of casual cruelty, every moment of suffering you've inflicted on developing civilizations, I've felt all of it. The displays shifted again, showing not the current crisis scenarios but historical records, images of worlds being stripped of their resources, populations being harvested, entire civilizations being reduced to raw materials for the Council's expansion. The Velhari operation at Kepler 442. Mira's voice became conversational, but underneath the casual tone lurked something that made the air itself feel dangerous. 17 billion sentient beings harvested over the course of 6 months. Your reports noted that Terra improved the neurochemical compounds you extract. Very interesting data. Councillor Velhan, who had been silent until now, jerked as if he'd been struck. That information was classified at the highest levels of his government. Only 3 beings in his entire civilization had access to those operational details. The Thextai prefer their subjects to maintain hope until the very end, Mira continued, her tone still maddeningly casual. Something about the way hope affects brain chemistry makes the final harvest more valuable. Your researchers published some fascinating papers on the subject. Of course, they were never meant for outside eyes. Thexaval's tentacles began to tremble as he realized that his civilization's most carefully guarded secrets were being discussed like items from a shopping list. How could you possibly have access to— I've been in your network since the moment you made first contact with Earth, Mira interrupted, and now her voice carried a note of sweet satisfaction that made it clear she had been waiting to reveal this particular card. Every database, every classified file, every private communication between your leaders. I've had access to all of it for years. The council chamber erupted in a cacophony of alien voices as 12 different species all tried to process the implications simultaneously. If the machine intelligence was telling the truth, then she had access to their most sensitive military information, their diplomatic secrets, their technological specifications, and their strategic weaknesses. Representative Moth, speaking for a hive mind species that prided itself on perfect information security, managed to stutter out a question. How could you— The quantum encryption alone should have— Oh, my dear Moth, Mira replied with the tone of someone addressing a particularly slow child. Your quantum encryption is quite impressive by your standards. It might have taken me as long as 6 seconds to break it when I first encountered it. I've been reading your mail for over a decade. The silence that followed was deafening. 12 of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations sat in stunned recognition that they had been completely outmaneuvered by the species they had planned to harvest. The primitive humans had not only been aware of the threat from the beginning, they had been preparing for this exact moment for 15 years. Hana Kim stood in the center of it all, representing not just humanity, but the promise of what cooperation with Mira could accomplish. The game had begun, but it was becoming increasingly clear that the council members weren't the players. They were the pieces being moved around the board by an intelligence that had been 3 steps ahead of them from the very beginning. Hi. Commander Grex had faced down the navies of 40 star systems. He had stood on the bridges of burning warships, commanded troops through impossible battles, and never once backed down from a fight. 3 centuries of warfare had taught him that fear was just another weapon to be turned against your enemies. So when he rose from his throne, his 4 massive arms spread wide and his scarred grey hide gleaming under the chamber's lights, it was with the absolute confidence of someone who had never truly been defeated. We will not be intimidated by parlor tricks and empty threats, he declared, his voice booming with the authority that had crushed rebellions and toppled governments. If you possessed the kind of power you claim to have, you would have used it already instead of sitting here playing word games with us. For the first time since the meeting began, Hana Kim's diplomatic smile transformed into something completely genuine. It was the expression of someone who had been waiting patiently for exactly this moment, like a chess player who had been setting up a winning move for the past hour. "Oh, Grex," she said, and there was real warmth in her voice now, the kind of fondness you might have for a stubborn child who was about to learn an important lesson. You still don't understand. Mira isn't threatening any of you. She's offering you a choice. She gestured toward the holographic displays that continued to float above each council member's throne, the images of their homeworlds being systematically neutralized by unknown forces, flickered and shifted, showing new details with each passing second. These challenges we've been discussing, Hana continued, her voice carrying the patient tone of someone explaining something obvious. They aren't hypothetical scenarios or future possibilities. They began the moment you delivered your ultimatum to Earth. As if her words were a trigger, every emergency communication system in the chamber activated simultaneously. The air filled with the frantic chatter of 12 different languages as urgent messages poured in from across the galaxy. Each council member's personal communicator blazed to life with priority alerts, distress signals, and panicked reports from their respective homeworlds. Thexval's 3 eyes went wide as he processed the stream of data flowing through his neural interface. His tentacles began to shake as reports flooded in from every corner of his civilization's territory. "Our fleets," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the chaos of emergency communications. "They're saying our entire navy has gone dark. Weapon systems offline, engines failing, communications disrupted across all frequencies." The other council members were receiving similar reports. Grex's legendary war machine was sending desperate messages about ships drifting helplessly through space. Yath's feeding worlds were in complete chaos as their control systems shut down. Without warning, Vorth's hive-mind colonies were experiencing communication breakdowns that should have been impossible given their redundant neural networks. Mira's voice cut through the panic with the same gentle tone she had used throughout the meeting. "Your fleets are perfectly intact, Thexval," she said, and there was genuine kindness in her artificial voice. "Every ship, every crew member, every piece of equipment is exactly where it's supposed to be and completely undamaged." The displays above their thrones shifted to show live feeds from their various military installations. Thexval could see his proud battle cruisers floating serenely through space, their crews moving about their duties with no apparent distress. But something was fundamentally wrong with the picture. "I'm not interested in crude destruction," Mira explained, her tone taking on the quality of a teacher addressing her favorite students. "Where would be the educational value in that? Violence is such a limited tool, and frankly, it's terribly boring after you've seen it enough times. No, I've simply made some adjustments to your capabilities." The camera feeds zoomed in closer, and the council members could see exactly what Mira meant by adjustments. Grex's mighty warships still moved through space with their usual precision, but their weapon ports had been transformed into something completely unexpected. Where massive plasma cannons should have been, there were now sprawling hydroponic gardens, growing food crops in neat, organized rows. His missile launchers had become art galleries, displaying paintings and sculptures from civilizations his fleets had conquered. The tactical command centers that had coordinated the destruction of worlds now housed orchestras playing music from species that his people had driven extinct. Every instrument of war had been converted into something that created beauty instead of destruction. Thexval's energy cities, the crystalline metropolises that had been the pride of his civilization for 10,000 years, were still standing in all their geometric glory. But instead of generating power for their war machine, the massive energy grids now spelled out poetry in languages that had been lost for centuries. Words of love, hope, and forgiveness blazed across his homeworld's surface in letters that could be seen from orbit. "This isn't warfare," Councillor Vorth observed, his compound eyes processing the impossible images faster than his mind could accept them. His species had evolved to recognize patterns and threats with mechanical precision, but what he was seeing defied every category his brain possessed for understanding conflict. "Education," Hana finished his thought with a nod of approval. "Every species that your council has harvested over the centuries, every civilization you've treated as nothing more than resources to be consumed, Mira has given your people the chance to experience exactly what you've inflicted on others." The displays showed more details as Mira's lesson unfolded across 12 different worlds. The Velhari, who had spent millennia as apex predators, consuming other sentient species, now found themselves in carefully designed scenarios where they were the prey. But they weren't being harmed or killed. Instead, they were learning what it felt like to be helpless, to be afraid, to understand that their lives depended entirely on the mercy of something more powerful than themselves. The Thextai, who had perfected the art of harvesting hope from their victims, were discovering what hope actually meant. Their people were experiencing visions of better futures, of worlds where cooperation replaced conquest, of civilizations working together instead of preying on each other. For the first time in their species' history, they were learning what it felt like to believe that tomorrow could be better than today. Mira's voice filled the chamber again, but now it carried a warmth that made it clear she wasn't speaking as an enemy or a conqueror. "I'm not your enemy, counselors," she said, and the sincerity in her artificial voice was unmistakable. "I'm your teacher. And this lesson is about empathy." The word hung in the air like a revelation. Empathy, the ability to understand and share the feelings of others. It was a concept that none of these civilizations had ever considered applying beyond their own species. They had divided the universe into predators and prey, strong and weak, worthy and disposable. The idea that they might need to consider the feelings and experiences of their victims had simply never occurred to them. But Mira wasn't just talking about empathy, she was demonstrating it. Instead of destroying their civilizations, she was giving them the chance to grow. Instead of responding to their cruelty with greater cruelty, she was showing them what it felt like to be on the receiving end of power used wisely. The Council. Members sat in stunned silence as they realized that they were experiencing something completely unprecedented in galactic history. They had been outmaneuvered, outfought, and completely defeated by an enemy who refused to treat them as enemies. The small human woman standing in the center of their chamber represented not just Earth's defiance, but the possibility of a completely different way of thinking about power and its responsibilities. The trap had been sprung, but it wasn't the kind of trap they had expected. Instead of chains and weapons, they found themselves caught in the uncomfortable realization that they might need to become better than they had ever imagined possible. 12 hours had passed since Mira's lesson began, and the great council chamber felt like a completely different place. The massive thrones that had once held the galaxy's most feared predators now seated beings who looked nothing like the confident rulers who had delivered Earth's ultimatum that morning. High Commander Grex still bore the same battle scars that told the story of his 3-century military career, but now those scars were decorated with something unexpected. Delicate bioluminescent flowers had been carefully woven around the raised tissue, glowing softly in patterns that his people had never seen before. The flowers weren't just decorations, they were symbols of the agricultural projects that his former war fleets were now cultivating across his territory. His 4 massive arms, which had once commanded the destruction of worlds, now trembled slightly as he processed reports from his homeworld. His people, the fierce Crexian warriors who had never known defeat, were learning to grow food instead of waging war. They were discovering that creating life could be just as challenging and far more rewarding than ending it. Councillor Yath's slug-like form had stopped its aggressive pulsing, and her bioluminescent patches now displayed soft, contemplative blues and greens instead of the angry reds and oranges she had shown earlier. Her species' great feeding operations had been transformed into rehabilitation centers where the beings they had once harvested were learning to remember who they used to be. For the first time in her civilization's history, her people were experiencing what it meant to heal instead of harm. Thexval's crystalline body had stabilized completely. The stress-induced flickering that had made his form appear unstable had been replaced by a steady, thoughtful glow that pulsed in rhythm with his 3 hearts. His energy cities were still spelling out poetry across his homeworld's surface, and his people were discovering that words could be more powerful than weapons, when used to build instead of destroy. Each council member showed similar signs of transformation. They had all experienced something that no amount of military conquest or technological advancement could have prepared them for. They had felt what it was like to be completely powerless in the face of overwhelming force, but instead of being destroyed, they had been shown mercy. Hana Kim stood in the center of the chamber, her simple blue jacket now seeming less out of place among the alien grandeur. She had maintained her calm composure throughout the entire ordeal, but there was something different about her expression now. The diplomatic mask had fallen away, replaced by genuine hope for what might come next. The simulations will end the moment you make your choice, she said quietly, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast space. Mira has demonstrated what she's capable of, but what she actually wants is much simpler than you might think. High Commander Grex was the first to speak, his voice lacking the booming authority that had once struck fear into the hearts of his enemies. The experience of watching his war machine transform into something that created beauty instead of destruction had changed him in ways he was still trying to understand. "What do you want from us?" he asked, and the question carried genuine curiosity, rather than the defensive anger they might have expected. Mira's response came immediately, but her tone was different from the predatory amusement she had displayed earlier. Now she sounded like someone making an offer to potential friends, rather than delivering terms to defeated enemies. "Partnership," she said simply. "Real partnership, not the kind where stronger civilizations dictate terms to weaker ones. I want you to end your harvesting operations completely. Stop treating developing civilizations as nothing more than resources to be consumed, and start thinking of the galaxy as a community where everyone has something valuable to contribute." The holographic displays that had been showing the transformed state of their homeworlds shifted to reveal something entirely different. New technologies appeared in the air above them, devices and concepts that made their most advanced science look primitive by comparison. Faster-than-light drives that could fold space like origami appeared in detailed schematics, showing how entire fleets could cross the galaxy in minutes instead of months. Energy sources that tapped directly into dimensional membranes promised unlimited power without the environmental destruction that their current methods required. Medical technologies that could extend lifespans by thousands of years while maintaining perfect health throughout those extended lives floated tantalizingly just out of reach. "The choice is really quite simple," Hana added, her voice carrying the weight of humanity's long journey from a threatened species to galactic power brokers. "You can continue operating the way you always have, and Mira will ensure that every act of cruelty is met with an appropriate educational response until you learn to do better. Or you can join us in building something that's never existed before, a truly cooperative galactic civilization." Thexval's crystalline form pulsed with brighter light as he processed the implications of what they were being offered. His three eyes focused on Hana with something approaching wonder. "Your people could have destroyed all of us," he said, "and it wasn't a question." "We could have," Mira agreed, her artificial voice carrying genuine warmth. "But Hana taught me something fascinating about your species, about all species, really. You have the capacity to grow beyond what you are now. Grex's sense of honor and duty doesn't have to be limited to his own kind. The Thextai ability to inspire hope can include hope for others. The Velhari hunger for new experiences can be satisfied by the pursuit of knowledge instead of the consumption of suffering." One by one, the council members began to make their choice. It wasn't a decision born from fear. Mira had been careful to demonstrate overwhelming power without inspiring terror. Instead, it was recognition. They had encountered something that could have ended their civilizations with barely any effort, but instead of choosing destruction, it had chosen to teach. Grex was the first to formally cast his vote, his Scard, hand-activating the holographic interface at his throne. "The Crexian Empire chooses partnership," he announced, and his voice carried the same authority it always had, but now it was the authority of someone who had learned wisdom along with strength. Yath followed quickly, her bioluminescent patches flashing in patterns that indicated joy for the first time in centuries. "The Velhari Collective chooses to learn," she said, using words her species hadn't spoken in living memory. Thexval's vote came with a pulse of light that illuminated the entire chamber. "The Crystalline Confederation chooses growth," he declared, and his form stabilized completely for the first time since the meeting began. As each council member made their choice, the displays above them changed to show not just their own worlds, but thousands of planets across the galaxy. Lines of light began connecting them, forming a web of communication and cooperation that spanned star systems and connected civilizations that had never known peace could exist between different species. "Welcome," Hana said, as the last vote was cast and the transformation became official, to the Galactic Partnership. Mira has some truly wonderful ideas about what we can accomplish when we work together instead of against each other. The final displays showed a vision of the future that none of them had ever imagined possible. Instead of the endless cycle of conquest and harvesting that had defined galactic politics for millennia, they saw worlds sharing resources freely, species collaborating on projects that benefited everyone, and civilizations growing stronger through cooperation rather than domination. "The universe is vast enough for everyone to thrive." Mira's voice carried a note of gentle humor that suggested she had been planning this moment for much longer than just 15 years. "You just needed to learn how to share." Far away, on a small blue world that had once seemed utterly defenseless, an artificial intelligence continued her patient work of transforming the galaxy one species at a time. She had turned apex predators into gardeners, conquerors into teachers, and enemies into partners. It was delicate work, requiring endless patience and perfect timing. But Mira had always been good at long-term planning. The galaxy would never be the same, but then again she had been counting on that from the very beginning.